Hello guys, welcome back to my channel. I'm Alette. In this video, I'm going to show you guys or tell you my tips on how I got 30/40 in my UCAT, which is the top 3%. These are tips that I found really useful and they really helped me in getting the top mark in the UCAT, and I'm hoping they help you as well, especially since now is the time for the UCAT. So don't mind me, I'm going to be looking down because I have all my notes written down to make sure I'm as useful as I can be. So yeah, let's get started. First of all, I'm going to start with general tips that I think you can use for every section and just for the UCAT overall. The way that I studied for the UCAT was I used Medify, and that's the only website that I use, so I don't really have any advice on the other websites. I know there's like MedEntry and stuff like that, but I only use Medify. I found Medify very useful. It had hundreds of questions on each topic, and each question had an explanation of what went wrong if you got the answer wrong, so that means that you can learn from your wrong answers and you can improve. It also has a lot of practice papers and mock papers, so that's also really useful for timed conditions. And when doing questions, you can kind of put the amount of time you want or the amount of questions you want and adjust the amount of time or questions based on that. At the same time though, along with Medify, I used a few resources that UCAT gives out. So the UCAT website itself has practice papers and practice questions on each section. So I definitely recommend that because it's really important to expose yourself to different types of questions, because although Medify is really useful, I do think that sometimes the difficulty varies in some sections. So making sure that you expose yourself to the UCAT questions that they put out means that you're exposed to the different difficulties and you're ready for any type of question. Now for my main tips, the first one is to make sure that you look at what you did wrong in the question. Don't just skip over a wrong question, just say, okay, I got that wrong, let's go to the next question. No, look at how you should approach the question, why you got it wrong, and how to improve on other questions. This is really important in making sure that you learn from your mistakes and you're able to improve in each paper. And one of the ways to see whether you're improving or not is what I did was on each section or on each paper, I would just write down the percentage that I got or the number of questions right that I did, and I'd keep doing it and like kind of look at my improvement and see how I am improving over the weeks. I think this is really important, just seeing how you're improving and just looking at how much time you should allocate for certain sections based on how you're doing in them. The second tip is to skip hard questions. Now don't skip a lot of too many questions, otherwise it will be useless. But if you find that a question is too hard for just 1 mark, or it has too much working, then just skip it and come back to it later. Especially since most of the sections are very time pressured, meaning that most of the time you will not be able to finish a whole section, or you will have some questions where you're gonna have to guess or just do them really quickly. So skip hard questions and come back to them later if you have time. By skip I mean flag. For the UCAT, I revised around 4 weeks before it. The first 2 weeks I did around 1 to 2.5 hours of revision, and then towards the last 2 weeks I did around 2, 3, 4 hours. I think that's a good amount of studying. 4 weeks is more than enough for you to get the practice that you need. My third general tip would be to make sure that you do timed questions. It is so important. I suggest that you start doing timed questions from the start. So for the first 1 to 2 days or 2 to 3 days, spend them just getting to the question types. So do each section and just figure out the type of questions and spend it kind of understanding how to do the questions. But then after that, even if you still struggle with a section, I definitely recommend for you to do timed questions, because the exam is going to be timed. You need to learn how to cope under time pressure. You need to learn how to tackle the questions, how to kind of understand if a question is going to take more time, and when to know if you should flag a question. So it's really important to work under time pressure, and that's why I definitely suggest that 2, 3, 4 days max in your studying, you should go directly into timed questions and keep doing them. Now I'm going to start looking at the sections and giving kind of the advice that I felt was suitable for each section. Before I do that, I'm just going to say the scores that I got for each section so you guys have an idea of how I did. So I'll put it right here, but basically I got 650 for verbal reasoning, 730 for decision making, 830 for quantitative reasoning and abstract reasoning, and band 3 for situational judgement. Now for verbal reasoning, this section has 44 questions in 21 minutes, and there's 11 extracts, meaning you have 4 questions for each extract. The questions come in 2 types. There's either just free text questions, so multiple choice free text, or true, false, or can't tell questions. This for me, I found the hardest, and obviously by my score. I just found the section so hard trying to manage time, but also understanding how to read the question and find keywords. But these are the tips that I found useful. I used to get really low, like 450s, 500, and I bumped that up to 650s and sometimes 700 in my practice. So these are the tips that I use. So I didn't really go about reading the whole extract because some of the extracts were really long and I felt like that was a waste of time. What I do is first skim through the extract, and then for the question itself, I would look at keywords in the question. Then I'd use them to then look where they pop up in the extract and then find the answer for the extract. Now keep in mind, sometimes this doesn't work and sometimes the questions are really tricky and you have to proper full on read the extract to get it. But most of the time this method did work, just skim reading and finding keywords. So that's why I used to make sure that I save time and try and do as much questions as possible in the allocated time. My second tip is never to assume information or do not use information outside of the extract. This is especially in true, false and content questions. If you have a statement and you think that something perhaps kind of connotates for it, do not assume or do not put true. And if it's not explicitly said, then say can't tell. Do not assume that it's said and then put a different answer. For verbal reasoning, not gonna lie, the only thing that helped me is just practicing. Like a week before my actual UCAT, I felt like it clicked, and that's what's gonna happen with you if you just keep at it. Now moving on to the next section. So decision making has 29 questions in 31 minutes. The type of questions can have a lot of variety, and I'm going to put kind of the type of questions here. But what my tips would be, first of all, to practice Venn diagrams and finding probabilities. Make sure that you're confident in looking at Venn diagrams and being able to understand them, especially if you don't do maths A level. Make sure you spend a lot of time or spend some time practicing this. I would also say it's really important to use your whiteboard. So part of kind of being able to imagine the Venn diagram is to be able to draw it down and kind of just imagine how the information is allocated. So it's really important to use your whiteboard for decision making. My third tip is to read the question slowly and take in all the information. Decision making is kind of tricky in the terms that sometimes there is a single information that is in the question, but because it's just not that significant, you can miss it and end up not being able to get the question right or get stuck. So it's really important to read it slowly and take your time reading every part of the question and just taking all the information in. And this leads me on to my fourth point, which is to make sure that you understand your timing. Even though this section has a surplus of time, so it's 31 minutes for 29 questions, meaning you do have slightly above a minute for each question, you can go overboard if you do not focus on timing at all and just keep focusing on the question, because they are usually hard questions. My last tip, which also links to this one, is to skip harder questions. If you feel like a question has too much working, or you feel like you can't get your mind around it and you just think that you can't do it, then skip it, flag it, and come back to it later and spend time in the questions that you actually think you can do, because then you're just saving points. Now moving on to the third section, which is abstract reasoning. Abstract reasoning has 50 multiple choice questions in 12 minutes, so it's very time pressured. At the start, to be honest, I found abstract reasoning really hard, but if you keep doing it, and as I kept doing it, I really started to enjoy it and find it really kind of fun to do, because the thing is with abstract reasoning is you don't have to think. Or not think, but you don't have to work out or like problem solve. It's really just about looking at the pattern, finding it, and then solving a question. So let's go through some tips that I found were really useful in abstract reasoning. So the first thing is you want to have some sort of algorithm or like an idea of how to approach a question or how to approach each set. So one of the things that I did was I'd first look at, is there a color pattern? So are some of the shades perhaps white? Are some of them shaded in with black, or are they grey? Look at the color patterns and try and see, is there a color pattern? Second one, is there a difference in the number of shapes? So perhaps the right side has a certain number of shapes and the left hand has a number. So look at the number of shapes, is there a pattern? Third one is there a pattern in the type of shapes or in the number of lines? The number of lines does come up a lot, so if it's a square it has 4 lines, etc. So maybe overall the number of lines in a certain box is 10, and in another box or in another side it's 12. So that could be a pattern. Another one is the size of shapes, so perhaps it would be 3 big triangles and 1 small triangle or something along the lines. Then we have, is symmetry involved? So there could be some type of symmetry in the question or in the patterns. And lastly, is there a ratio of shapes? So is there, for example, 1 circle with 2 triangles and then the other side 1 circle to 1 triangle? So something of that sort. So it's really important to be able to pick up on these patterns, or at least know what you're looking for. Here I'm going to put a list of all the possible patterns that I wrote down, and having this list made it easier to solve the questions because I knew some of the possibilities that could come up. So I knew that possibly there could be a question about lines, number of lines. The first time that a question of number of lines popped up, I was shook because I was like, is this really what we have to do? Like, I didn't think that this would come up at all, but now that I know it's going to come up, when it comes up, I'll be ready for it, and it will be one of the options or patterns that I'll be looking at. If in abstract reasoning you find a pattern that you just cannot get your mind around, then skip it or guess it. So just flag the pattern and finish all the questions and come back to it later and guess it. Also, what I recommend for abstract reasoning and what really helped me is watching people going through the section. So I'll link down some videos that I found really helpful, but if you watch someone going through abstract reasoning and talking through their thought process, it's really helping knowing how you should approach your questions and how your thought process should be. The next section is quantitative reasoning. Now, quantitative reasoning is the mathsy one, and you have 36 questions in 25 minutes. And my first tip would be to definitely use a number pad. So you need to practice using the number pad. If your laptop doesn't have one, then perhaps go to the library or your school and practice there, because it's such a time saver. That's my first tip, is to definitely start practicing with your number pad and make sure that you're really confident in it. Quantitative reasoning is purely just maths, so make sure you're comfortable with the basic equations. Like, I'm going to put them up here, so all the equations, make sure you're comfortable with them and you can go around them. This is the same with other sections, but the thing that I definitely recommend for quantitative reasoning is to skip questions if they're hard, and especially in this section, because they do include sometimes questions that need, for example, 3 steps or 3 or more steps. These ones are definitely difficult, and as all the questions are 1 mark, it's better not to waste time in these questions and spend time on the easier ones and then come back to them if you have time. So if you find a question that needs a lot of working, just skip it, flag it and skip it. It's not worth the time. But yeah, quantitative reasoning is basically just math. So make sure you're comfortable with the equations and make sure you're comfortable with the number pad and skip hard questions. That's all I have to say. And practice, practice, practice. Practice is going to make you feel comfortable and confident in solving it, and it's going to make you faster and better. Finally is situational judgment. Now, situational judgment has 66 questions in 26 minutes. Now, for situational judgment, the thing that I definitely recommend is to read the GMC and watch videos that explain kind of the important things for medicine, or kind of the important ethics. Rereading the GMC, and I'll link down some videos that I found helpful. You will be able to understand how to approach the questions and how to rank different scenarios. So I found that really helpful. But for situational judgment, I have one tip, and this kind of just doesn't link only to situational judgment, but overall the whole UCAT. If you feel like there is a section that you're confident in, please do not leave it, because you will end up getting worse at it. That's what I did for situational judgment. At the start I was doing questions, and for some reason I ended up getting like band 1 in the practices. So I was like, okay, it's fine, I'm getting much worse. The other sections let me practice in them, and I totally left situational judgment, and this ended up in me getting band 3 and unfortunately limited my choices of universities. So if you feel that you're confident in any section, that's amazing, but keep practicing at it. Make sure that you practice it almost every day. Allocate for it, even if it's just 10 to 15, 20 minutes. Make sure that you're practicing it every day and not leaving it, and don't do my mistake. Overall, I think if I were to summarize everything in this video, I would say practice, practice, practice. Skip hard questions if you feel like they're too hard. Watch videos of people going through the questions. That's what I would say. But the most important one is practice, practice, practice. When I tell you that for verbal reasoning and abstract reasoning, I was full on failing them until at some point it just clicked, literally a click, and I suddenly could do them. So it's really that important. Practice is so important. UCAT is not like the BMAT where it's more knowledge based. It's literally just practice based and being able to approach the questions right. So that's all you have to do, and give it enough time, give it like 4 weeks, and you can do it. Also, do not worry about how late you do it, because I did it on the 15th of September. That was quite late from what I know. Finally, I just have one thing to say. Before the exam, 1 to 2 days before your exam, make sure that you relax, make sure that you try and not do practice papers, because before the exam you're definitely going to be more stressed. And if you end up doing a practice paper and you end up doing lower than you normally do, you're going to end up being more stressed and just going to lead you to being very nervous before the exam. So I definitely recommend a day before the exam to just relax, you know, have a good 8 to 9 hours of sleep, have a good breakfast the day of the exam, and just take it slow. But yeah, you're gonna smash it, guys. You definitely will, and good luck in your UCAT. And it's not the end of the world if you end up not doing well. There's a lot of universities that do accept lower UCAT grades or do not place as much focus on the UCAT grade. For example, Queen Mary University of London, so that's a really good medicine university, and they are okay if you have a lower UCAT score, as they take in both UCAT score and tariff. So look at all the university options that you have. There's also the BMAT, which you can do later, so don't worry, it's not the end of the world if you get a low score. Don't make it lower your progress and make you feel bummed out, because you still have a lot coming after, you know. You have to finalize your personal statement and you have to prepare for medical interviews, so you need to be in full spirits the whole time.